Okay, we're good. So this talk is not email fit. It's not fail item. It's called FailTime, or failing towards success. And in a lot of the talks like this, you're going to see this probably a little bit different than the normal talk, certainly different than what and video fail. Let's try again. We've got to have a failure during a fail talk. It's kind of the way it works. I wasn't planning on putting any kind of quotes up here about failure and success because everyone does that. See in a tech talk. We're going to get beyond the motivational quotes. We're just going to dig into the things that really matter. And ultimately it comes down to why this talk. Well, why not? Most con talks talk about successes, all the great things they did. They exploited this thing over here, pop calculator. Most cons talk about the successes and celebrate the successes. This is not that talk. Failures happen all the time. Mistakes are made. And sometimes we go ahead and do something that doesn't make sense because we're told to. And we fail because institutionally, we have to. We follow directions that don't make sense. We do what we're asked to do. Like put a picture that's on this USB drive on my cake. Right? So, Sean, what are you doing here? Well, the idea of talk on failure started with my talk at Walmart's SparkCon conference about a year ago. And during the usual post-talk Q&A, I got asked about Active Directory stuff, which is great. I love talking about it. And someone said, have you ever failed at any of this? I'm like, are you kidding me? All the time. All the time. But that just gave me that idea of people only see your successes. They see you as this person that does great things in this area. And a lot of times people don't want to talk about the things that didn't go right, the problems they had, the things that went wrong, how they got to that point. And this idea was re-sparked, so to speak, when I was talking about the concept of failure at DerbyCon with Waxwing while I was manning the Trimark booth. So here we are. This is not a real agenda, so chalk this up as a failure of expectation. You expected something that outlines this journey. Yes, there'll be a personal anecdote. I'll talk about some technical failures of mine, how to be better. Failure is part of success, and yes, we will have to close out with some motivational quotes. I will put the slides up on adsecurity.org. I know that doesn't make sense, but that's what I have. And I forgot to do that, so I'll save that for later. So about me, my name is Sean Metcalf. I'm founder of Trimark Security Company. We have a booth out there. Come say hi. A Microsoft certified master in Active Directory, one of about 100 in the world. Most of them work for Microsoft, though. I've spoken at a number of conferences. I'm very happy to say that the first time I ever spoke on stage at a conference was at BSidesCharm, the first BSidesCharm. So I'm very happy to be back here on stage talking to you about failure, which doesn't make sense in that context. But I'm a security researcher, consultant, and I own and operate adsecurity.org, which, who's heard of that? Okay, cool. For those who haven't heard of it, please check it out. It's pretty great. You don't have to listen to me. Jessica mentioned it earlier. So, all right. So this is where normally the talk would pivot and talk about here's what we did. We pivot. We based on this. We did this. We did that. Again, this is a different type of talk. So we're going to start by highlighting my failures in my about slide. I dropped out of college without graduating. Despite the fact that I successfully attended a community college for 2 years, and I went to a 4-year university. I was a Microsoft MVP for a single year and not renewed. I've had talks rejected at ShmooCon, ShakaCon, and Black Hat. And I restarted adsecurity.org after a failed attempt at blogging a long time ago. So I guess the real question is, why are you here? I mean, this is a talk about failure. Hopefully not everyone's here to see me fail on stage. That would be kind of awkward. But if it happens, it happens. So I'll just say it was part of the talk. So we'll go with that. But ultimately, the wise Master Yoda says, the greatest teacher failure is. And it's true. So one of my favorite hobbies is photography. And I started photography in high school, as many people did, with something that looked like this, that used something called film. And the crazy thing about film is you just couldn't take pictures all day long, go click, 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 etc. You had 24 to 36 exposures depending on that film canister. And so you have to be very careful and deliberate of the pictures you took, and you have to ensure that you had the right exposure setting, the right shutter speed, and make sure everything was perfect for that picture. Otherwise, it wouldn't turn out right. So I learned about photography from my father, who was very into photos, loved taking pictures. And so when my mother was pregnant with me, he, of course, took his camera and took pictures. And so he'd take a deliberate picture of this, deliberate picture of when I was born, in the hospital, and later on with my mother holding me, and then once I was brought home. And eventually, my mom goes, "Hey, Jim, I'd love to see those photos." And he says, "Absolutely." And she's like, "Yeah, and they better be good because you said no to the photographer at the hospital that came in to take a picture of me and Sean. So, yeah, I want to see these. It'll be really good." And so he said, "Great, I'll get them for you." And here they are. There are no baby photos of me when my mom was pregnant with me, when I was born, and a little time thereafter. Why? Well, back then, when you had the film, you had to load the camera. My father forgot to load the camera. So, quite an epic fail. They did make up. They got through that. I'm still here. But I learned a lot from that. I learned from his mistakes with cameras and photography. Now I use digital. I back up my photos everywhere. I have 2 memory cards in the camera. It writes to both of those cards. I take it out, I copy it to my computer. It cloud backups. It goes over here. I've got photos all over the place because I don't want to be in a situation where those photos are gone. So let's talk a little bit about my journey. Some other failures and major risks that I took. I got an F in European history because I didn't understand that the tests were entirely based on what the instructor wrote on the whiteboard or the blackboard. I didn't realize I had to write down everything that he wrote up there and that nothing that was covered by the test was actually in the book. I failed to understand what was actually being tested and why. And then the next test came around. I was like, all right, I'll take some notes. But I didn't write down everything that was on the board, and I failed the test again. I failed to understand what the point of it is, which, again, right now I kind of failed to understand the point of it. But I realized that I learned how to take better notes because I was not doing what I was supposed to. I was not hitting the level, hitting the mark that I should have been. I interviewed with EMC twice, and I was not hired. Honestly, I would not have hired me back then. I had the first interview. I failed the interview. I said, "Hey, can you give me another chance? I can really do this. I could work for you guys. Like, EMC, this would be cool, right?" They gave me a phone interview. I'm like, "No, sorry, you're not good enough." And I wasn't. And I learned from that. I learned it from the questions they asked, what they were looking for, and it wasn't a good fit. I wasted a lot of time on useless stuff, such as arguing on audiovisual forums, building my own IMDb inventory of DVDs using Microsoft Access. Yes, I'm an extreme nerd. I've taken measured risks. I left a company of 100,000 employees to join one with less than 10, and then to see that company grow to 250 and eventually get sold. I paid over $10,000 to go after an elite certification, the MCM. I started my own company. And then with that company, I developed a service offering that is very much like what Microsoft does, except we take it from a different perspective. That's a risk. People ask all the time, well, how are you different than Microsoft? Come by our booth, I'll tell you. So Albert Einstein is one of the greatest minds in history, and he said that failure is success in progress. For him, failure was a very perfect component in how to get to success. He recognized that you're going to make mistakes. You're going to learn from these mistakes. Albert had plenty of mistakes. He couldn't speak fluently until he was 9. He was expelled from school because he was rebellious and didn't like what was going on. He was denied admittance to a technical institute, and he split the atom trying to make beer. Okay, the last one's I got from this documentary called Young Einstein, so I think it's accurate. Moving on. So Katie Masuris, great person, you should follow her if you're not. She pointed out that Quantum Magazine had this article on Einstein being on the verge of finishing a theory that would replace Newtonian gravity. I mean, epic, right? except he made a critical last-second error that had him doubting himself. One of the greatest minds in history was doubting himself. He's like, this isn't working. I can't do this. But ultimately, you want to keep going. You can do great things. You're going to make mistakes along the way. If you haven't noticed, this is not your typical con talk. I love this chart. I've seen it on the internet in multiple places. We go from being a beginner, I know nothing phase, to what's referred as the hazard phase. I'm an expert in this area. Eventually, we move to the section or the level at which we are an expert because other people tell us we are. But realistically, if you ask us, we'll say, yeah, I know a bunch of stuff about this, but I really know nothing because there's so much that I could know about. So again, in these kind of talks, if I was up on the TED stage, I would probably put up some definitions. So let's do that. That looks good. It's a failure talk. We should probably define that, right? A lack of success, the omission of expected or required action. Now, this is a fun joke. I could throw up success also. But one thing I've discovered when I was going through this and making these jokes is that the original definition of success was specified as achieving or failing to achieve its aims. Right there. Look it up. So at one point, success was defined by also failing to do something, which is a really interesting thing to recognize or understand. And so I was thinking, what else don't I understand properly or appropriately that maybe I've been missing? This guy said, inconceivable. Every time he was like, that's impossible. There's no way you could do that. So guess what Sean did? Sean looked up the definition of inconceivable. It actually is not far off than how he was using it in the movie. Of course, the problem is he's using it as hyperbole. He's saying it all the time, which means that at a certain point, once all these inconceivable things happen, you probably should recognize that maybe they will. So there's an anonymous poet that I found, wrote, I still mess up, but I'll start again. I keep falling down. I keep on hitting the ground. I always get up now to see what's next. Birds just don't fly. They fall down and get up. I want to try even though I could fail. If only we could know who this anonymous person is, because this is, oh, that's right, Shakira, Try Everything. And where did we find this from? Zootopia. Exactly. Thank you to the person in the second row with the kids, who has probably heard that song way more than he ever needed to. And so the key behind this is, obviously you want to keep going. You're going to make those mistakes. I think it's a great message for kids. If you think about kids, they mess up all the time. They're constantly testing boundaries. What do they do when they learn how to walk? They fall down all the time. And parents run over and pick them up. They have to learn these things. They're going to learn, they're going to fall down and get back up again, which is a great song for kids and adults. And Tara, another great person to follow on Twitter, if you aren't being rejected more than accepted, you're not asking for enough. If you're winning constantly, you're in a rut. I thought this was great. And I also found a quote by J.K. Rowling who said something very similar. It is impossible to live without failing at something unless you live so cautiously that you might as well not have lived at all, in which case you fail by default. You were a failure at failing. And so J.K., of course, had a short, unhappy marriage. After that, she was a single mother who, no job, living on welfare, sank into the depths of depression, found healing in writing. And she wrote Star Wars. Actually, sorry, it was Twilight. Sorry, JK. Just kidding, JK. So mental barriers. This is an interesting thing that a lot of people don't realize they have. These are the things that are preventing you from doing something that you might want to do, but you go, I can't do that. Or maybe you've had people in your life that said, no, you can't do that. Or you need to do this. Or you need to go down this path. You need to go to high school, you need to go to college, you need to go get a graduate degree. Then you go and you do this academic thing because that's what everyone else in your family has done, right? We have mental barriers all the time. We look at something, we say, it's not possible for me to go there because there's an entire wall and a gate on the top and some other gate there, and I just can't get there. I can't do it. And so many people, when they look at a wall, they go, well, let's see, I guess I'll just keep walking until I find a way around it. Other people look at this wall and go, I see handholds and footholds, and I think I could just climb over it, and we could just go where we want to go. And so the thing about failure is it's more than just the attempting to do something, trying to do something. It happens all the time. And one of the things that I really enjoyed in Jessica's keynote this morning was talking about questions. When someone asks a question and you don't understand the question, it might not be because they're dumb. It might be that you're just missing what they're asking. And so I always go, that's a good question. I wonder what you're asking. Because the way that I see it is that when asking a question, there are words in that question that somebody's asking. There's my interpretation of what that question is. And then somewhere in the middle is what's actually being asked. Someone may ask you, how do I do this? They don't necessarily want to know how to do that specifically. Or they say, I need to implement X, which to me sounds like a solution. But ultimately, the thing that I'm not gaining or gathering from them is what is the problem they're trying to solve. I might tell them how they can deploy that solution, but if that solution does nothing for them and doesn't solve the actual problem, we have not helped at all. So as professionals, we want to make sure that when someone asks a question, we fully understand what they're asking. It's okay to ask for clarification. It doesn't make you look dumb. It's just a way to get more insight and more understanding of what that person is trying to communicate with you. So Walt Disney said the difference in winning and losing is most often not quitting, which is a great quote. This is from a guy who dropped out of school to join the Army, and the Army said, no, we're not taking you. Before starting Disney, he had Laugh-O-Gram, which went bankrupt due to his inability to run a successful business. Yeah, Walt Disney. And he was fired from a Missouri newspaper for not being creative enough. Really? That's pretty incredible. Walt Disney. I'm pretty sure everyone here has heard of Disney, especially since we were talking about Shakira and Zootopia. There's a book that I really like, and graduates tend to be given this as a present, called Oh, the Places You'll Go. And it talks about you'll do good things, you'll do bad things, there'll be this, there'll be that. And it's kind of an interesting microcosm of life about the challenges and things that you'll go through. But one of my favorite parts of this book is about a place called the waiting place. Waiting for a train to go, or a bus to come, or a plane to go, or the mail to come, or the rain to go, or the phone to ring, or the snow to snow, or waiting around for a yes or no, or waiting for their hair to grow. Everyone is just waiting. Waiting for the fish to bite, or waiting for the wind to fly a kite, or waiting around for Friday night, or waiting perhaps for their Uncle Jake, or a pot to boil, or a better break, or a string of pearls, or a pair of pants, or a wig with curls, or another chance. Everyone is just waiting. Waiting. And then it goes on and says, no, but that won't be you. You're going to move on from the waiting place. So many people that I know have just been waiting. What do I mean by this? I mean waiting for something to happen, waiting for something to happen in their life, waiting for a promotion, waiting for their boss to recognize them, waiting for the opportunity to work on a cool project that they want to work on, waiting for something to happen. You can make that change. You can, instead of waiting, go, I volunteer to work on that project. That sounds really great. Or tell your boss and say, you know what, I know it's not required, but I'm just going to send you a list of things that I do every week, and here's what I've worked on, and here's what I did and was able to get done. Volunteer that information because it will help you to stop waiting and actually actualize the things that you want to do. So you see the elephant, you know what I'm talking about. What am I going to say? How do you drink wine with an elephant in a top hat, right? No. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. Which reminds me of a book by Dr. Leo called Baby Steps. And it's about how to live life one step at a time. And Dr. Leo helped a guy named Bob get out of his office, get onto the elevator, walk down the street, and get on the bus. How did he do this? Because he told Bob, don't think about the bus and where you're going. Think about the steps that it takes to get to the door in this office. And then from there to the elevator. And then the next step. And then Bob figured it out, and he did great. And they made a movie called What About Bob? It was fun. But for a lot of people, what they're doing and where they're headed seems like this big, expansive desert just looming over them. Something that they just couldn't possibly get to the end of. And it's challenging. It's something like, I can't do this. It's too far. It's too much. Others look at this and go, all right, what's on the other side of that desert? I'm working towards something. There's something important that I want to get to. Maybe it's a beautiful beach, and I walk through all this sand. I get to that beautiful beach, and I can relax and lounge on the sand, swim in the ocean, and really enjoy it. And make milestones, make points along the way that says, okay, I'm going to reward myself as I go through each of these parts. when I was going through and taking Microsoft tests to get certified as a Microsoft MCSE, MCM, all those, what I did was I said, I will reward myself every time I pass a test. I'll go get ice cream. And then when I finish the whole thing and get the certification, I'll do something that's a little bit bigger, right? Because then I had something to look forward to. And it wasn't such a chore at that point because I was thinking also about that fun thing that I would be doing later. So Curlin Harlan Sanders says, one has to remember that every failure can be a stepping stone to something better, something greater. And this from a man who founded a number of various businesses which all failed. He didn't begin Kentucky Fried Chicken until he was 65 years old, and his recipe was rejected 1,000 times before accepted. And before calling it Kentucky Fried Chicken, it was called Big Bucket-O Chicken. All right, maybe not. So let's talk about some of my failures. If you try to fail and succeed, which have you done? I have done many things. So I'm going to talk about a few different case studies of things that I've failed at technically that I've worked on that I thought would go a different way. Fixing permissions. So I was working at this organization and I was new, so I was like, I'm going to make this great. I'm going to do wonderful things. It's going to be fantastic. And I tell my boss, you know what, boss, you need a better name. So Joe, boss, it's nice knowing you. I'm going to fix these permissions on these shares. So I took a Saturday, I went in, and I used this wonderful tool called iCackles. And I'm like, I'm going to do this. And I sat down, I started typing out the commands manually, first mistake, and I ran it through all the shares and proceeded to lock myself out of everything. This was a wonderful Saturday, much like today, where the sun was shining, the birds were singing, and I'm sitting inside the data center, banging my head against the computer because I locked everything out. I changed permissions I shouldn't have. I had no backup. I had no backup plan. And I did not pre-write the commands that I had typed. And like a dummy, I typed CLS at some point. So I had no idea what I'd run. Yes. So much later that night, I was able to revert all my changes. And I finally left at something like 2 or 3 in the morning the next day. So I have the slide up there for people looking at this later, but final result, failed. So let's talk about something more interesting or better, detecting golden tickets. So the first time I got on the stage, I talked about how to detect golden tickets and why that was a great thing, because now defenders could actually know if someone was using golden tickets in their environment. And Skip Duckwall and Benjamin Delpy at Black Hat 2014 presented on Kerberos golden tickets, how you could use Mimikatz to actually create and forge a ticket. They gave you access to everything in the network, in the environment. Now, of course, you need to have admin rights initially, but in doing this, you could basically write your ticket to whatever you wanted. And a few months later, CERT-EU came out with a white paper saying, definitively, there is no clear indication of such attack in Windows logs. I decided not to listen to them. Why? Because I was thinking there's got to be a way. Maybe they didn't look at something. Maybe I could figure it out. So what I did was I started thinking about how that might work. Here's Benjamin Delpy working in his home office on his computer, banging against Kerberos with Skip on Twitter DM or a Skype call or whatever, trying to figure this out. And on the other side, we have the Microsoft developers, someone from Kerberos, someone from the operating system, someone from network, someone from the event log condition configuration, sitting in a room whiteboarding out and setting up the specs and making sure it lines up and things get logged correctly. So my hypothesis was maybe Ben missed something. So I had to figure out what the anomalies were. What was something that didn't look right? What was something that just didn't fit? Maybe they labeled something that was different than how Microsoft labeled it. Maybe there was something that just wasn't there that should have been there, or something that shouldn't have been there that was. Maybe there was something that was just so obvious that everyone had missed it. Or maybe, just maybe, they had done it their way because they found that that's the way that worked. Ah, cinnamon. So I looked at the event logs after running through the attack in my lab, and I looked at it, and I stared at these for quite a while. And I'm like, there's nothing here. It all looks normal. I don't see anything that's missing, anything that's obviously different. Yeah, I use Star Wars characters in my lab, so Darth Vader would normal in this situation, maybe not in your network. But when I put them together and compare them side by side, I said, wait a second, something is obviously different and obviously wrong here. And that's how I figured it out. And I was able to figure this out because I started looking at things and comparing them, making a baseline of what normal is, and then looking at what was different. You can do the very same thing on your network. In fact, what you should do is baseline normal in order to best understand what's different and anomalous. And again, this is for people later on that are looking at the slides. Success. I figured it out. But at first I didn't. I missed it. I spent several days looking at this, and I was like, well, maybe CertiU is right. And I went and did something else, and I'm like, no, there's got to be something there. And I went back to it. Another failure case study of mine, Microsoft MVP status. When MVP means making vacation plans. So 2 years ago, around this time, I tweeted out, I'm excited to announce that I'm now a Microsoft MVP. Woo! It's great. I was excited. Get some cool benefits. Get to be part of the club, right? Get to be invited out to Redmond to go to their super secret meetings. Just kidding. There are none. And then about 16 months or 14 months later, I got an email that started out, in reviewing your impact, I'm sorry to inform you. Now, anyone who reads emails knows that this is never going to be a good email. So after that, I'm like, wow, this is not feeling so great. Okay. So I went to Twitter and I was like, hey, guys, just so you know, I was really excited. I'm not an MVP anymore, so you can take me off those lists, I guess. Just learned I'm no longer a Microsoft MVP. Last year I was the first-time MVP, and I'll miss that community, but I'll still keep sharing things because I enjoy what I do. And the response and the reaction to this was really pretty great. I started getting responses that were just like very heartwarming, very real. Very touching. And people all across the community were like, hey, you're doing good things. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about what Microsoft thinks. We think you're good. We think you're great. Your mom probably thinks you're always an MVP. MVP's titles don't matter. Still an MVP. Titles don't make the man. And that was really great. And then probably the icing on the cake was when Jessica talked me into submitting to Microsoft Blue Hat last year, which was in November, and I was accepted to speak about Active Directory security. And so I talked to Microsoft about the problems I see and things that should be fixed. And in front of an audience, mostly of Microsofties, I proceeded to live edit my About slide. Which was fun. And at this point, I can laugh about it because, you know what? It's not a big deal. I do what I do because I love it. I enjoy it. It's challenging for me. And then RallySec said, hey, guess what? Sean, you're a RallySec MVP. So thank you, RallySec, for keeping the MVP dream alive. So again, final result. I'm not really sure what the final result is here, but I'm okay with it. Failed research topics. So I've done a number of posts on adsecurity.org and a number of posts and presentations about things that I've looked at and found out. Well, there's a number of these that never made it to the blog because they just didn't work the way I thought they would. One was removing Kerberos RC4 encryption to stop attacks. There's so many RC4 attacks in Kerberos. Kerberosting, initially golden tickets and forged tickets, but now they use AES, so that doesn't really help. But there's a number of them. And I started writing a blog post like I normally do. I start it with the information about what's behind it. I write a few paragraphs to provide the foundation of the information that's there, and then I go dig into what I'm talking about. I was so certain that this was going to work, I started writing the blog post. In fact, I really went into detail about what this was. I wasted a lot of time writing this blog post, and it never got to where I thought it would be. Now I'm going to go back and test this again with 2016 and Windows 10, but it'll probably be the same result. But that's okay, because I'll learn something from it. I know what works and what doesn't. So when a customer goes and says, hey, I can just remove RC4, right? Like, well, I tested that out. Doesn't seem to work that way. And that's something that I've learned. That's something that's helpful. The other one I looked at was an attack using the Land Turtle attack, which was this Hack5 device called Land Turtle. It plugs into the USB drive. It has a NIC on it. And Rob Fuller, a.k.a. Mubix, came out with this attack where he realized that if you put this little Land Turtle device or USB armory, which is just a little computer on a USB stick, if you plug it in, basically it spoofs that NIC, and by using DHCP and responder, you start getting credentials for the person, NTLM credentials for the person that's logged in and locked on that system. And I'm like, well, I can block this. There's got to be a way to block this, right? I'm going to do this. And I started writing all this great stuff about how it works and how I'm going to block it and all this other things. I did figure out how to block it. But nobody here has read that blog post. Why? Because it's not effective. There's a device ID for a Land Turtle. There's a device ID for a USB armory device. Because when you plug in the USB device, it goes, I'm this device ID. Here's why that doesn't work. USB is packet-based. And the device is telling the computer information about itself. When does that ever work, right? So I had a GPO that would block that device ID and stop it from working. But all you have to do is modify the configuration information in that USB device so it's a different device ID. Now I'm Microsoft Keyboard. I'm allowed, right? I was successful at one point, though. I did successfully brick my laptop by blocking all the USB devices, which I don't recommend you do. And I had to do a full restore and recovery on it, which is why I don't use my own production laptop anymore for that kind of testing. So I failed on that, but I learned a lot from it. So Michael Jordan said, I've failed over and over and over again in my life, and that is why I succeed. Michael Jordan, one of the greatest basketball players ever, was cut from his high school basketball team. He tracks his own failures. He knows he's missed more than 9,000 shots. He's lost almost 300 games, and that Michael Jordan himself will tell you he has missed the game-winning shot 26 times. Wow. And then he led Earth's team to beat aliens in a championship basketball game. So, I mean, the guy is amazing. By the way, if you haven't seen the documentary Space Jam, I highly recommend it. But ultimately, mental state matters. Barney Stinson from How I Met Your Mother said, when I get sad, I stop being sad and be awesome instead. True story. Right? So I have this rule where something happens, I get upset by it, I give myself 24 hours. I can be upset about it, I can do whatever I want, just be frustrated, withdraw. A day later, I start figuring out and problem solving. But ultimately, depression is no joke. Get professional help. Thankfully, The Rock has helped me write these slides because he came out recently and talked about challenges and difficulties with depression in his life. And he said that one of the most important things you can realize is you're not alone. You have friends and family. Reach out. And The Rock, at 23 years old, was cut from the Canada Football League. Yes, they have a football league. This is The Rock that got cut from the Canada Football League. At 23, $7 in his pocket, he had to move back in with his parents. He got very depressed, got very sad about this. So for him, failure is something that he embraces. He pushes forward with that. He recognizes it doesn't work for everybody, but it works for him, and he's been very successful in doing so. And again, thanks to The Rock and Under Armour, they put together a campaign about talking about failure and using it to get better. My personal philosophy, always making my past failures inform my current actions. And The Rock has been one of the most successful people, of our time. You might say wrestling's fake, but not everyone gets to get these titles this many times. And Hulk Hogan certainly has not said of anyone else that he's the biggest superstar in the business. The guy has been on Forbes' top 100 most powerful celebrities. He's been at number 25, and since then he's been in the top 20. So just because things aren't working out now doesn't mean things won't work out later. Sam Jackson, great actor, right? He didn't really get successful until he was like in his 50s. It takes time. Sometimes it doesn't work the way you want it to at this point in time. There might be a reason for that. It might not be your time now, but it might be later. So there's a book that I love called The Charisma Myth, and basically it talks about mental state being everything. You start with the mental state of I can do this, and even I will do this. When I look and try to figure out golden ticket detection, I started with the thinking of there's got to be a way to detect this. There has to be something that is different about the way that this attack gets logged. I was successful in that. I wasn't in other things, but I started with that. And positivity breeds positive results. And one of the things that I like to do when I'm not feeling so hot or so great, stand up straight, roll back my shoulders, take 5 deep breaths, and go, I can do this. It helps a lot. So, InfoSec failure story time. I reached out to some friends who gave me some stories, and I picked a couple of them that I'm going to share with you. One of them said, years ago, I wrote my first snort signature, probably my 10th, looking for content, PowerShell, that's it. Any port, any protocol, etc. for all our network devices in the world. Nearly brought down our back end for processing these hits, about 500,000 hits in 15 minutes, and they set up new QA processes for him. But it opened his eyes to a completely different way for looking at host-based indicators over the wire. And he went on to write nearly 150 snort signatures over the next several months based entirely on that. Who is this person? Daniel Bohannon, who has been the person, the name in PowerShell obfuscation. He has learned from his mistakes, and he pushes forward because of them. Some would say despite them. So I talked to some pen testers, and they said, IR poisoned the 24 I was in, which happened to be where all the IT staff worked. I DOSed them all. They couldn't work for 3 hours. I locked an entire domain out when I didn't fully understand how lockout observation window operated. Affected 2,500 users. Used hash dump on a DC from Interpreter, blue screen the DC, which was the PDC emulator. Caused a little bit of problems there. So these are a few different people. I'm not going to name them. But in conclusion, you can't completely fail at something if you never stop trying. Right? And there's a movie I watched recently which had a quote in it, which didn't really seem to fit the movie that I was watching, but I thought it was pretty good. And the quote was, if you want to make the world a better place, take a look at yourself and make a change. Who? Michael Jackson said that quote, but actually it was Batman. Ultimately, we have the power and the ability to change who we are and what we're doing or where we are in this point in time. We can leverage our failure to push forward with what we're doing. It's okay to fail. Silicon Valley has a saying called fail fast. Venture capitalists usually will not fund a new company in Silicon Valley unless the founders have already failed at a couple of other companies first. Why is that? Why wouldn't they do that? Why would they hire the person, or why would they put millions of dollars into a company that has failed? The guy behind it has failed. Why would we do that? Because they've learned from it. They said, okay, well, we're going to go into this business. That didn't work. We're going to pivot. We're going to do this. Now we're going to do cybersecurity, so give me all your money. So Katie Masuris again said, never believe anyone who doesn't believe in you. Reject their reality and substitute your own. Give everything you have to whatever you set your mind to. You can climb the unclimbable. When you look back, you'll reflect on how well you accepted the opportunities in front of you and acted upon them. I love this because so often we go to a friend and we say, hey, I'm going to go do this. And they're like, that's a really dumb idea. And we go, oh, okay, I guess it's dumb, right? Why? Why do we do that? Why, when we're so excited about something, do we tell someone else about it and we accept them saying, no, that's stupid. Why would you ever do that, right? I'm going to start a company where we're not actually going to have any cars. We're not going to hire anybody, but we're going to have people drive around cars and pick them up and deliver them places, right? Oh, that's a dumb idea. We already have that. It's called taxis. I'm going to start a company where I'm going to rent out other people's places. I've never met them in my life, to other strangers who I've never known, but I'm going to connect them, and I'm going to call it Airbnb. People are like, that's dumb. Why would you ever want to do that? That can't be something that's going to be a good idea. But they persisted. They kept moving. Despite the negative feedback, they said, this is a great idea. I know it is. I'm going to try it. And if I fail, I will have learned something. So Robert Schuller has a few quotes that I'm going to share with you. And these are some of my favorites. And these are things that I really internalize. What goals would you be setting for yourself if you knew you could not fail? It's a very interesting effect on your psychology. I love psychology. I read a lot of things about how psychology works, the psychology of selling, psychology of people. Ultimately, we don't do something because we have fear. We have fear of failure, right? What would happen if we couldn't fail in that endeavor? How would we handle things differently? How would we move forward? What would be our choices? So if you couldn't fail at it, what would you be doing differently now? Or if you could fail in a way that where you were completely safe, where failure doesn't mean anything. There's no negative results of that failure. You'd be much more inclined to do that, right? So what I try to do is look at it and go, okay, what's the worst possible thing that could happen? And then I walk back from that. And inevitably, I get back to something that's not so bad. Building on that, what dreams would you have on the drawing board if you had unlimited financial resources? I worked with a realtor to look at houses, and he took me to several houses one day, and he goes, okay, Sean, if somebody gave you one of these houses, which one would you take? Because he was asking me about questions about it. I was like, I don't know. I like this one. I like that one. I was being very wishy-washy. He said, but if I gave you this house, which one would you take? And I said, none of them. Because none of them really fit. None of them are really what I would want, what I would want to get. It's not me. And what he did is he took the financial component out of it, and now I could make decisions without that being something that was in my mind, something that was holding me down from actually looking at the things that really matter. Ultimately, financial stuff does matter, but to a different extent. I worked with a guy who had this saying where he said, okay, but if for $5 more, if you could have this on your network, would that be something you would want to do? $5, right? Changes the whole dynamic because someone will go, well, I can't do that. That's too expensive. What Jessica talked about this morning in the keynote, which I really love and which I preach all the time, is you have a lot of tools in your utility kit, in your utility belt, right? You can use these. You can use all of these free utilities in order to lock things down and make them better, to protect the environment without having to spend a lot of money. Sure, there's going to be some things you're going to spend money on, but a lot of the things that are the most impactful are things like the Windows Firewall that are free. It just takes your time to figure out. And there's resources on the internet to help with that. What plans would you be making if you had 30 years to carry them out? Again, taking time out of this consideration, out of this conversation. I'm too old. I can't do that. All this stuff's already been figured out. I'm coming out of college. I just got my degree. Everyone's already done all the cool stuff. Absolutely not. One word for you, if you're graduating college or high school and you're concerned about all the cool stuff that's already been done, cloud. Nobody knows what it is. Everybody wants to use it. Become a cloud expert and own the next 10 years of your life. So I love these three because they each take one major factor out of it. Fear of failure. Financial concerns. Time. Those are the three factors that often weigh down on how we decide things, how we think about things. But my favorite quote, and the one that I pretty much live by these days, is a year from now, you'll be a year older. What are you going to do? Ramit Sethi said this. And I use this because I'm like, absolutely. As you get older, time goes faster. When you're 5, it seems like it's going to be forever until I finish my dinner and I get my cookie, right? When you're 12, it's like it's forever until I'm going to get to go to the mall and buy that thing I want to buy. Time speeds up. In another year, there's going to be another BSidesCharm. What is it that you want to achieve? Don't let the fear of failure hold you back. Thank you very much. That's been my time. Thank you for yours.